government has modified its semicon policy in order to woo more manufacturers to make in India, while earlier incentives varied between 30 to 50% fiscal support depending on different categories. This has changed now, and all of them will get a flat 50% incentive. This modification is likely to attract large investments by companies to set up chip design and manufacturing facilities in India. To take this forward, we're now joined by Jaswinder Ahuja, Managing Director of Cadence Design Systems, and Krishna, CEO and President of India Electronics and Semiconductor Association. Jaswinder Ahuja, do you think this will help India attract some of the bigger semiconductor manufacturing companies in the US and Taiwan to India? Because now the US has a strong semiconductor incentive policy of its own. India does not have an ecosystem. Our policy is at a very nascent stage when it comes to taking off. So do you think these new changes will help us get more investments, get some of the bigger established players in the world into India?
Parikshit, as you rightfully pointed out, right, we are competing in the global landscape with respect to attracting investments in semiconductor fabs. The US has announced its policy, and they've allocated $50 billion. The EU also has its own CHIPS Act, and they've allocated another 50 billion euros or thereabouts. And of course, Taiwan and Korea are established players and leading in that space. So how it actually plays out, time will tell. But I think it's a step in the right direction. I think I don't know of any country that has established a large semiconductor manufacturing ecosystem without government support. So government at least is taking the right steps. My understanding is that the $10 billion layout that the government announced last year is just one step in a larger blueprint, and they are willing to invest more beyond that. So I think it's another step in the right direction. In terms of being able to attract the biggies, so to speak, I think time will tell. The timing, had we done this a couple of years ago, I think we could have definitely seen more traction. But right now, we are indeed competing when all countries are trying to double down and expand their semiconductor manufacturing capability, secure their own supply chains, given the overall geopolitical backdrop.
Right. Mr. Krishnamurthy, instead of a 30 to 50% categorization, 50% incentive uniformly across all kinds of technology nodes, all semiconductors. At the same time, all categories, not just the 28 nanometer, which was eligible for 50% of the project cost incentive, all categories of semiconductors, all sizes will now be covered under the 50% incentive. Do you think this gives more options to semiconductor manufacturers?
Yes, Parikshit, this is absolutely correct. That after announcing the policy in December 15th of 2021, the government was constantly in conversation with the industry, trying to get feedback, trying to look at what the industries are talking about this policy per se. And I think the government is very receptive to feedback and inputs. And the changes that we saw within about 6-8 months after the policy was announced is a very clear indication that the government is considering all the inputs that were given to them with respect to the requirements of the compound fab, as well as the OSAT and ATMP, where the incentives that were available were at a slightly lower level, like at 40% and 30%, as you rightly mentioned. Now, the important thing is the semiconductor ecosystem is just not the wafer fab. And I think the learning on this from the policymakers is extremely important. And I think it's happening at a rapid pace. And I think the design ecosystem that need to grow and exist along with the slightly lower hanging fruits like the OSAT and ATMP, which can be put into action on the ground in terms of creating the manufacturing capacity. Next is the compound fabs, which again requires a slightly lower level of investment compared to the silicon wafer. So I think by providing higher level or matching level of incentives to all of them at the same level as 50%. And remember, on top of this, the states are also giving anywhere from 20 to 30%. So from a capex point of view, this is going to be very attractive for whoever is trying to look at setting up the semicon manufacturing. But I agree with Jaswinder that we are playing in the global field. It is not confined only to the India demand. And semiconductor manufacturing can become viable economically, and the ROIs will be sustainable only if we are able to cater to the global market. So that requires patience, ability to play deep into the ecosystem, and more importantly, I think Parikshit, you started by talking about the ecosystem. So building the ecosystem to support all this incentive is the other thing which the whole focus also need to converge on.
Right. So, Mr. Ahuja, taking off from where Mr. Krishnamurthy left, what more do we need in terms of the ecosystem in order to be a credible, strong player supplying to global markets?
So, Parikshit, I mean, there are many different ways to look at the overall semiconductor ecosystem, but in a simplistic way, I'll give you two dimensions. One, of course, is the different facets that feed into the actual fab ecosystem directly, which is all the raw materials, all the gases, all the other stuff that goes into the fabrication process. I think that's one ecosystem. Some elements of that do exist in India because of other industries, but broadly that ecosystem needs to be established. The other more important ecosystem is, even if you were to fabricate the chips in India, the question is, who are the customers, right? Where are the designs coming from? And the second thing is, once the chips are fabricated, who are the downstream manufacturers that will take those chips and put them into systems and ship them to the customers? So there are two different dimensions to look at the ecosystem. Let me talk about the ecosystem of customers, both upstream and downstream for the fab. I think that's where, again, the government has recognized that it's not just manufacturing, but design that's equally important. We need companies in India that are designing chips and products for the Indian market or other markets that are like India, for example, large parts of the developing world, Africa, parts of Southeast Asia, parts of South America, etc., which have similar needs, similar market characteristics, and similar consumer needs. So we need to stimulate the product design ecosystem, which is an upstream ecosystem, and then downstream the systems manufacturing ecosystem. And what Krishna mentioned too about things like OSAT and other downstream manufacturing, I think those are also equally important. Now, we've seen some activity there with the EMSs and the EMCs, so to speak, the electronic manufacturing clusters, and the EMS companies like Flextronics and the like Sanmina and the like that are establishing footprint in India. We need more activity there. And of course, we need companies that are designing products, not just manufacturing products, but designing products using these chips. So upstream companies that are designing the chips and downstream companies that are designing products using those chips. I think that ecosystem is extremely important. And that's where India can differentiate itself, given the very strong design expertise we have in the country. And clearly, in my mind, I think that is the more important ecosystem that we need to continue to invest and focus in developing.
Right. Okay, we've completely run out of time. Mr. Krishnamurthy, one very quick question. Which categories of semiconductors do you feel we will be able to have some amount of scale when it comes to manufacturing? 28 nm, 45 nm, 65 nm. Where do you think we can build scale in the near future?
Well, Parikshit, I will not worry about the nanometers geometries much, but look at it from an application point of view. India consumes today something like close to $20 billion worth of semiconductors, which is estimated to go to $110 billion in the next 4 years by 2026. And power semiconductor, for that matter, automotive electronics, medical electronics. So these are some of the, and telecom. After 5G is getting deployed, you will see a large amount of telecom subsystems that gets developed in the country and gets manufactured. So these are all the application segments that, I would say the Indian design industry, exactly what Jaswinder talked about, will bring the chips. That is where the DLI scheme of the government is going to be playing a critical role. And then the downstream, when it comes to OSAT, assembly, test, manufacturing, marking and packaging, the ATMP segment, even the distribution, warehousing and distribution of this for the global market. These are all low-hanging fruits, according to me. So we need not be completely fixated only on the 28 nanometer silicon wafer fab as the center of the whole ecosystem. But there are a lot of other things all around which also has to play a big role. And I think the government policy is addressing every one of them.
All right. Okay, thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Krishna Moorthy and Jaswinder Ahuja. We've run out of time. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Newscentre. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.